Morning, Doug. We have talked about a lot of very unpleasant things recently in the last several episodes, and I thought it was somebody actually commented it on one of the last videos about how negative it was and kind of felt this nihilism, and I replied with a quote that I've heard you say often, and that is that the situation is hopeless but not serious. I'd like to dig into that a little more and see what you mean by that exactly.
Yeah, let me first comment on what you just said about nihilism. I've actually, it's funny, years ago when I was playing around with dating sites, when I wanted to, find, sort through the millions of available females, I said, now, how can I sort out the wheat from the chaff? And so I think I describe myself as a libertarian anarchist with solipsist and nihilist tendencies. And, if somebody knew what I was talking about, that meant I might be able to talk to them. And who knows? Is there anything wrong with having nihilist tendencies? Well, that's a very philosophical question, just as having solipsist tendencies. And I guess that really ties back to what you just mentioned about the catchphrase, which I do like to use sometimes. Situation is hopeless, but not serious. I think it keeps things in perspective. So yeah,
So
it's a big subject.
So let's talk about the nihilistic part a little bit first. When you say describe yourself that way, what is nihilism and the way you think about it? What does it mean? And just tell me a little bit more about that first.
Well, I'm not really a nihilist, but a nihilist comes from nihil, the Latin word, which means nothing. And it means that you actually believe in nothing. Well, that's certainly not true of me.
No.
But on the other hand, people that take themselves and take the world too seriously could use a touch of nihilism. So that's why I'm sympathetic to a touch of nihilism. I mean, you can't take anything too seriously, quite frankly.
Well, it's almost like you could replace that with a touch of humility, maybe, and you accomplish basically the same thing.
Yeah, although I don't believe in humility per se. I think Rand said people that are humble usually have a lot to be humble about.
That's true.
So I think it's better to be accomplished, but modest about your accomplishments, not to be arrogant about them, which is, I think humility is a vice. Modesty, which is often mistaken for as a virtue. So different things.
I see. Okay. So in the world where it seems like we have all these major trends that are going in a bad direction. So that's obviously creates this environment that feels hopeless.
Yeah. It really does. Well, you see that Western civilization blossomed in its kind of its current incarnation in about the 16th century. And it's been going downhill, I'd say, since about the time of World War I, more or less. And seeing a negative trend all around you in civilization does give you a feeling of hopelessness or even pointlessness. And of course, that relates to nihilism again. At the same time, though, I've got to say, I said that I also am a solipsist. And a solipsist, there are many, many varieties of solipsism, but essentially, it means that, well, it can mean many things. It can mean anything that you imagine can be made real. It means that the whole world is a figment of your imagination, or it means that the whole world is a creation of the collective imagination, of all sentient beings in it. I mean, there's lots of things. So I am a fan of solipsism too. But well, I
Well,
guess what we're talking about now, however, is not that so much. But even though the world, even though the situation is hopeless, it's not serious. So why
yeah,
would it not be serious?
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Uh, well, you got to look at this on certain levels. There are a number of levels of these things. And on the most basic physical level, perhaps, which is, the first thing that pops into people's minds. Um, I often say that I don't worry too much about humanity for the long-term future because people are genetically programmed. We're like squirrels to save nuts. I mean, squirrels have no idea of the theories of economics at all, but they know enough to know they're programmed to know that winter is coming and they better put nuts aside. So, in effect, squirrels should be a model for humans because they know that they have to produce while they can and put that aside in the form of savings in order to consume. And you can't consume more than you produce, or the squirrel starves to death. He's got to produce more than he consumes. So,
A lot of people look at that and think that, well, we're such a consumer society though, and we don't, no one saves anymore. But the fact is that anytime that there's any kind of shock to the system, if you follow the national savings rate, like it just skyrockets upward anytime that there's any real sense of fear or chaos or disorder. And we saw that earlier this year, certainly with when the COVID stuff was announced, and the stock market got hit, the savings rate went from like something like 4 or 5% up to like 15 or 18%. So,
mhm.
people they do see it, like if unless when they see shocks to the system, it naturally causes a reaction in humans where they go, winter's coming, and they do seem to save more nuts. So that relates to what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. So that's a good reason why it's not, things will self-correct. Even if it looks hopeless, it's not serious because people will straighten things out. They'll straighten themselves out and they'll fly right. It's like the Chinese, when they were able to save again after they got rid of Mao. I mean, there were times that savings rate was running 30, even 50%.
Wow.
They were saving absolutely everything, to dig themselves out of the hole that they were in. So that's a good reason for thinking on the most basic level that even if it looks hopeless, it's not serious because people were genetically programmed to do that. And here's some more recent examples. I mean, you look at Germany after World War II, or let's say Berlin in particular. I mean, everything was destroyed. It was just flattened, everything.
Mm.
And it came back in 20 years. You look at Japan, which was worse than Germany, much worse. Everything was flattened in Japan. And now Hiroshima, which was ruins, it's beautiful, and things come back. Look at Korea after the Korean War. Do you know that I think most people aren't aware that the Americans dropped more bombs on Korea during the Korean War than they dropped on Germany and Japan combined during the whole 4 years or 5 years
Mm.
of World War II. There wasn't a building left standing on the peninsula.
I
That's,
remember
that's
actually.
just bombs. I'm not talking artillery and other kinds of explosives. And look at Korea today. So,
Mm.
as bad as things seem, they come back, at least from a material point of view.
Mm. Well, I mean, that certainly gives hope. 'Cause, I mean, people look at, James Altucher, a mutual friend of ours, wrote something recently about how New York was not going to come back, and it certainly seems to be true. And he got a lot of heat for that, a lot of heat for it. But, um, and New York may never come back, but I think it just shows you that I can't imagine that people thought that Hiroshima would come back after
No,
you dropped an atomic
no,
bomb
it's
on it, or hydrogen bomb.
hard to imagine. And actually, in terms of one night death tolls, the firebombing of Tokyo was a bigger deal than either Hiroshima or Nagasaki,
Hmm.
just using conventional fire bombs. But so, from a physical point of view, maybe there's not too much to worry about because people will dig in and come back. But maybe there are, well, there are other, maybe it's worth exploring some other things. Talking about what James said about New York not coming back. Yeah, I can understand his reasoning. I mean, he's a native New Yorker and he's definitely not stupid. But we've all seen the movie Escape from New York with Kurt Russell. And it's a really, it's a fun movie. I enjoyed Escape from New York. And in some ways I enjoyed Escape from Los Angeles even more. But, maybe if, let's say de Blasio and Cuomo, between the two of them, do such incredibly stupid things that there's no reason to live in New York anymore. And it becomes unpleasant and dangerous and everybody moves out. I mean, anything can happen. I mean, the Dark Ages happened. I mean, Rome itself was very, very livable. Let's say from the time of 100 BC, more or less, to up to 200 AD. But then, only a few hundred years later, I mean, the capital was covered with cows grazing, and they were disassembling the buildings for stone to make huts. So how did that happen? Anything can happen? Rome could collapse. It did collapse. And lots of examples of that. I like Isaac Asimov, and I guess his opus magnus was the Foundation trilogy. I don't know if you've gotten to that yet or not.
I have read. I only read the first one. I did not read the other two in the series.
Okay, well, basically, mankind has expanded throughout the galaxy, and kind of the capital city of the galaxy is a city planet called Trantor, and so I think it's Harry Seldon. Yes, he's the hero of it, and he's developed a method of predicting the future, you'll recall. And he predicts that the foundation is going to collapse and Trantor is going to look like Rome in the 7th century. Just totally collapsed. So Seldon goes to put together two foundations at opposite ends of the universe and, to save civilization, in other words. So even under the worst circumstances, the collapse of a galactic empire, forget about a collapse of a nation or a city or even planet Earth, Asimov predicts it's going to come back. And that leads me to my favorite Asimov story. In fact, it may be word for word, minutes taking to read versus ideas. I think it's the most important thing that I can think of anyway. It's called The Last Question, and it's available for free on the internet. I guess you just Google The Last Question, Asimov, and it can't be more than a half-hour read. And why is that relevant to what we're talking about? Because it's about entropy, how everything falls apart and disappears. And basically, it's I don't know if I should. I won't give people the punchline.
Okay.
Get into this thing because it's
Well,
just.
I will link to a copy of it in the description so that people have a chance to read it, and I will check it out myself. I have not read it.
Yeah, well, you'll love it, and when you read it, it'll put this phrase, "Situation's hopeless," which it is, because the second law of thermodynamics absolutely guarantees that absolutely everything, including the universe itself, is going to fall apart and collapse and go to nothingness. But as Asimov points out, that's not the end of the story, even there. And So the situation isn't hopeless if your time frame is long enough. That's the key. Of course, the
Well,
problem is that right now, if we're lucky, we've got 80 years or so
hmm,
to make things happen.
hmm. Well, let's imagine though. I mean, well, there, there, you can't. People just can't just sit around and hope that things get better. And and there still is, how do I say this? Throughout my lifetime, certainly personal freedom has been on a steady decline. Sometimes it accelerates, sometimes it slows down a bit, but it's clear. It's a clear trend, and that trend seems clear. It's going to continue. But that hasn't prevented me from building a life that's has all kinds of rich, textures to it, from friendships to family to you know some material success in the world and so forth. I mean, there's building, living with a good character. I mean, there's all kinds of things that I've been able to do despite those things. And I just wonder, what are your thoughts on? Is there an application of, well, it's hopeless, but it's not serious, that you can apply to an individual life rather than just looking at it from the cosmic perspective?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. How should you spend your time? I mean, um, to make life worthwhile so that the situation is not serious. And maybe that's why there's an attraction to why people, not so much today, but they used to join monasteries, often for reasons which were not very noble, but sometimes, just because they wanted to work and think, and they were religious, so they prayed. But that kind of puts things in perspective. You're born alone and you die alone. So what are you going to do in the meantime to
Right.
fill those idle hours? So I'm partial. I mean, one of the things I'm partial to is the model of a Taoist monk, not so much a Benedictine monk. I'm very familiar with that tradition, incidentally, having grown up in a cannibalistic death cult among the Benedictines for 4 years, incidentally. I'm much more partial to being a Taoist monk, follower of Lao Tzu. Uh, uh, and that allows you to be in the world, but not of it.
Hmm.
And so
So what does
it
that
just,
look like from a practical standpoint, though? What does that actually, because I've read the Tao, and uh, it's genius, and yet it's definitely not clear how I apply some of those ideas to raising my kids, building relationships, that sort of thing.
yeah, you're right. Lao Tzu could not have written a financial newsletter because he doesn't give a lot of
No
directly
stock
actionable
picks.
advice. Yeah, but well, here in Aspen, where I am right now, uh, John Paulson, the guy who made billions of dollars during the real estate collapse, his house is it's about 300 yards up from the one I am right now. And I don't know the guy personally, but I suspect, from what I hear, he's very materialistically oriented.
Mm.
I mean, it's all about money and having, the best car, the best house, the best jet, the best, like most of these masters of the universe. I mean, they're trapped. They're trapped in their bodies and they're trapped in the material world. Uh, and I guess if that's all there is, that's okay. But I'm not convinced that that's all there is.
Mm.
So, and since I don't know, and since I enjoy being contemplative, a Taoist living in the world is able to, you know, do things in the markets and just all areas of life. But he realizes that maybe that's not all it is.
Mm.
To me, anyway, that's what Lao Tzu is saying. And
Yeah, and
it's
the
because
difficulty
of,
is, I think the
uh,
balance is that is combining this still striving in the world to create and shape things, but not be so tied to the outcome of that striving, or the view of others in the world that might also be around you. You know, I mean, not falling victim to the mimetic drive that we have of copying each other.
yeah, here's another book that I think is worth linking to that explores this in a lot of ways. Alan Watts. I read his book, The Way of Zen, in high school, and it had a big effect on my thinking, and it still does. Uh, so I'd suggest that people that are interested in this general conversation get a hold of Alan Watts' The Way of Zen, and they'll find that it's a well-written, fascinating book.
Hmm.
Although sadly, it turns out, since I was a very good friend of Watts' best friend, and I asked him, uh, listen, did Watts discover the meaning of life? I mean, clearly a very smart guy who knew all the angles from a spiritual, religious point of view. And his friend said, nope, Alan didn't. You know, he had all the faults and worries and peculiarities of just about anybody else that you can imagine.
Hmm.
It's just that, you know, he knew a lot about this stuff and understood it, but wasn't, sadly, wasn't able to, with all that knowledge, wasn't able to make it, you
Hmm.
know, part of himself and actually ascend to a spiritual level.
Hmm.
The way in Robert Heinlein's book, Stranger in a Strange Land, uh, where at the end, Michael Valentine, I think the hero, you know, actually, you know, achieves Satori here and now and he ascends out of his body. That would be wonderful if we could do that. It would
Hmm.
solve all these problems.
It
But
certainly would. Well, you know, from a practical standpoint, there were some thoughts I had. I just want to run by you on things that you could do because, you know, maybe it's my Midwestern roots that make me very pragmatic. You know, I think very practically, like what can I really do, and also my focus on stoicism. It's like recognizing what's in your control and what's not in your control, and so. You know, some of the things that seem obvious and some things that you've championed over the years are the idea of essentially jurisdiction shopping. So that's, of course, maybe internationalizing yourself, but it could even be something smaller than that. It could be it's definitely the neighborhood you choose to live in, you know, the city you choose to live in, the country you choose to live in. Those things change dramatically the way that you actually experience the world.
yeah, it does because uh, you know we all know that it's been said. I think it's true to some degree that you are the average. Everybody is the average of the 5 people that they associate with most closely. So, you know, if for some reason you're hanging out with 5 hardcore criminals, chances are you're going to be doing naughty things. And 5 people of anything. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's on a very personal level, one-to-one level. But I think there's a lot of truth to that as far as the country you live in too. I mean, if you were living in the Soviet Union, forget about the 5 people that you're closely associated with. You're just going to be corrupted by the whole society. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to live in the area, not just associate with 5 really good people as your best buddies, but you know, have the general world around you be as favorable as possible because it affects you.
Right.
So yeah, you're right.
Well, I think with the Soviet Union, obviously, that's the extreme environment where the social control is so high. Everyone, you know, gets turned against each other, and there really is no way. There's no way out. But I think even if you don't get to this where you have extreme, you know, governments like that, it still is true because there's a zeitgeist essentially within the community that you live in and the country that you live in. And right now, the zeitgeist in America is definitely this left right tribalist silliness, you know, and it seems like if you go to Mexico, you're not going to feel it the same way. It's just not consuming the culture and the society in the same way. So it's just 20 miles south, and it's in your a different zeitgeist.
Absolutely right. And, I can get by okay in Spanish, but it's hard for me to carry on a philosophical conversation in Spanish. So that means that when I'm living in Argentina and Uruguay, I don't let the local politics bother me because I don't hear these people having these stupid arguments with each other the way the Republicans and the Democrats are having with each other. So from that point of view, it's better for my mental stability to live in South America than it is to live in the US, because I don't have to listen to this crap on television every day where they're not having actual intelligent discussions of philosophical issues. They're basically just screaming at each other and saying, I'll do this and I'll do that. For what reason? Or will, it's degrading, quite frankly. So yeah, I don't want to be in a society where that's happening because it affects you indirectly.
And not knowing, though, the thing is, well, the people, you might think, well, if you don't, it's happening, but you're not even aware of it because you're not, familiar enough with the language or whatever. The truth is that when most of that's happening around you, it has literally zero actual effect anyway. It's all in the mental and psychic sphere, really, where these battles are mostly fought.
Yeah, and what it does is it interbulates your mind. It it puts all kinds of things there that are disturbing and worrying, and you don't want those things there. So yeah, if you're a proper Zen monk, if you're a proper Taoist monk, yeah, you can clear those things out and not let them bother you. But that's very hard. It's better just not to be exposed to this type of thing. It's like if you jump into a cesspool, you're going to be covered in crap. You can clean yourself off, yeah, but it's better not to jump in the cesspool. So that's why I like to be in a mellow environment, quite frankly.
That's a good metaphor. One of the things that has always fascinated me about, let's talk about the 5 people that you're around, about you is that you have lots of different groups that you associate with. And I think might be a generational thing. I'm not really sure. And I don't want to sidetrack the conversation too much, but I know, in Aspen, you had the poker night and the 2 different men's lunches that you had. And I went to 2 of those different men's lunches with you, and a bunch of great guys in those groups, great characters, very entertaining and very welcoming for me when I visited. And, and I know in polo clubs around the world and other of these associations that you've had. And I just wonder, I don't see that in my generation at all. It's like these things don't exist anymore. And I don't know, I really think that my generation and the younger generation is worse for it. But I think that, I just wonder, were these just very common? I mean, were a lot of people in your generation just associated with these kinds of things? Or did you go out of your way?
Yes, and the answer is much less than in the past. I mean, Americans don't realize that during the 19th century, which was the peak century for civilization in general, and we can talk about I came up with a list of 12 things that are totally and absolutely unique to Western civilization. And we can have a separate conversation on that because it's very interesting because you have all these yahoos actively trying to destroy Western civilization in America. But anyway, the 19th century, great time altogether. But in the United States, the government was not important to people. It collected its import duties, and there were some things that it did, but it didn't do anything that it did today. So how did people sustain themselves? And it turns out that there were not just dozens, but there were hundreds of social and beneficial groups formalized. Like all that's left now are like Rotary and Kiwanis and Optimus and Lions. And there's still a few of these things left.
But no one knows what those are. My generation, we don't even know. We see those names someplace, but I don't even get why they exist or who belongs to them.
Good point. And there were hundreds of groups like that were, you know, were guys, mostly guys, would get together and, they'd do something together to improve the society and socialize with each other. And now you just have those few left that I mentioned, and most people only know about them because they see little signs as they're driving into town where Rotary meets at X hour at X place or something. But you don't join, and frankly, I don't join I'm not a member of those four things or other similar things because, I'm not interested in their particular objectives. So the best I can do is, get together with these generally successful, well, almost entirely here in Aspen, very successful retired and semi-retired businessmen, and bring in a speaker, and then we talk about it and so forth afterwards. And the same with the poker group, get together and chat about these things while we're playing with the cards. But one of the horrible things about this COVID hysteria is I'm fairly convinced that here in Aspen, those two longstanding lunch groups I was a member, I think they're destroyed. I'm not sure they're coming back. There's no indication they're coming back. And I don't think my Monday night poker group is going to come back either for a number of reasons. So this is one of the, some would say relatively trivial, but I'd say not destructive things of this COVID. And the computer, of course, I mean, everybody in younger generations is generally in front of their screen all day in a basement or someplace, hopefully nicer than a basement. And they're always looking at their iPhone when they're doing anything instead of talking to the person next to them. So
Right.
yeah, things are changing, it seems to me.
Well, and you say that those things you think might be considered trivial, but as the older I get, the more clear it seems to me that things like that are the things that make life meaningful. They make it richer. Those the relationships and the entertainment that you share with people and the learning that happens, and like doing this in a vacuum. It's great. I love reading. I love, most of the learning I do is on my own, but there's something special that comes from when you get a group of, fairly like-minded people, at least liked, valued people together, pursuing a specific topic together, whether it's mutual entertainment or if it's, some project within the community. I mean, there's something really powerful there. And actually, at some point, I'd like to get your thoughts on how I don't even understand how these groups were really run and formed. And I mean, there's no knowledge about this stuff among any of my peers, actually, that I know of. And just, so I'd like to try and encourage a little renaissance of groups like that, at least within the circles that I run in. I think would be helpful. But
Listen, for 30 years, I ran something called the Eris Society, ERIS, after the Greek goddess of discord here in Aspen. And I invited, the purpose of that group was for people that should know each other, was my opinion, and didn't, give them an opportunity to get to know each other. People that had done something that distinguished them, so that at Eris, ideally, anybody you walked up to, when you found out who it was, you were able to say, oh, you're the guy that did that. I heard about you. It was a wonderful thing. And I ran it for 30 years and then I gave it up. But I don't know if there are many things like that anymore, quite frankly, where people just hang around for 3 days together and get to know each other and entertain each other. And incidentally, put business deals together and just whatever comes out of it. But
right.
I don't know if there are many things like that anymore in the day of the Zoom conference.
Right. That's true. It's hard to do when it's doing this all virtual. So let me get back to my ideas. Uh, I wanted to kind of pitch you on, I guess, whether or not like how they practical finding that all this craziness is not serious on a practical level. Um, and so we talked about jurisdiction. The other one was basically just, it seems like much of life is a form of voluntary association. Now is coerced association that exists, of course, like the tax regime and stuff like that. It's coerced, but most of life, day to day, moment to moment, at least today in the world in America as it exists today, is voluntary association. So that could be whether, the way how I choose to spend my time, by consuming media that, gets in my head, or the people I choose to spend time around. We talked about that already. But I think even more importantly, the people you choose to not be around, choosing to disassociate yourself from things. And I often think, people that I've had some conflict with in my life before, that I could just opt out of it. The easiest way to resolve it was just simply to opt out. And it works wonderfully well. And it seems like it works. I don't know. That's my idea around this. So just voluntary association and disassociation is a way to have sanity and less seriousness.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, in this book that we've just published and is on Amazon now, Assassin, it deals with, the fact that there are some people that are just irredeemable and frankly just need killing. But there are a lot of risks and inconveniences and costs involved in taking out miscreants physically like that. So the best thing to do in normal day-to-day life, even if you feel like you want to kill somebody, is just to de-link from them, to disassociate from them. That's really the best thing to do, and to try to spend more time with people that bring value of some type to the game. You're absolutely correct. And all the time when I'm asking myself this question of, yeah, the situation's hopeless. I can see what's going on in the world today. It looks pretty hopeless. The downtrend is accelerating and so forth, but it's not serious because, look, let's start with the birth of the universe. The universe, to the best of our knowledge, if you believe physicists, has been here about 13.5 billion years. Long time, okay? But the fact of the matter is that this universe is still just a puppy. Yeah, it's 13.5 billion years old, but how long is it going to last? And the answer the physicists have come up with is we're not even at the teeny weeny beginning of the beginning. It's going to last many trillions, maybe hundreds of trillions, maybe billions of trillions of years into the future. So the universe is just a tiny little puppy. And so you got to put things in perspective. And we're only going to be here for 80 years, unless Ray Kurzweil is right, of course, and we get to live forever. But forever, even in that case, is only going to be a few hundred years before an accident like a bomb blast or an asteroid strike or something like that ends your existence. So you got to ask yourself, what's the nature of the universe? And that's why nothing we do right now is serious from that point of view, when you put it all in context.
It also seems like that the idea of, I think people who are more conservative by nature, are the desire, there's a sort of internal desire for whatever reason, and I feel this in myself, to preserve things, to keep things the way that, the way they were, as if it was ideal and at some point before, or at least that it was better before. And the way it seems to me, that's like fundamentally leading your psyche with fear, that the best that it was going to be is the way that it was. And I need to try and fight, kicking and screaming, moving into the future. Fear doesn't serve you well. Bad judgment you make, you make bad choices. You can't be creative, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. That's right. The problem with being a conservative, and of course, there are many, many good things about being a conservative, but what it basically means is you're conserving what you're presented with. And that seems kind of reflexive because some things are worth preserving and some things aren't. And this gets you into a real philosophical question. It's funny how these words have become so corrupted. Liberal and conservative, neither one of them mean what they used to mean any way at all. I mean, a liberal comes from the word liber, meaning free. And of course, liberals today don't believe in any kind of freedom. They don't believe in freedom of speech. They don't believe in freedom of thought. They don't believe in free markets, So how do they get this word liberal? And conservatives, instead of just conserving things that they thought about, that yes, this is worth keeping, they just conserve whatever they're presented with reflexively, like I don't know, like primitives.
Mm-hmm.
You're given this, that's the way it is, let's conserve it reflexively. That's really stupid. So more cause for pessimism, I'm afraid. But then again, what's the point of being pessimistic? Because the universe itself is going to wind down at some point. So you want a real problem, that's a real problem to think about. Even if you live forever, you're not really going to live forever.
Right. Right. And when I think, I think that being pessimistic is a giant mistake because it is essentially fear. It's fear, and you can't do anything useful in a state of fear. And in fact, you can be controlled very easily if you're in a state of fear. I mean, half of the reason for my shirt is this is what people do when they're afraid. They wear their masks without question. They they submit to authority without question. They just do what they're told. And I think that,
Yeah, I love that shirt.
thank
I
you.
mean, I think if you were in the t-shirt business, or even if you're not, you might be able to move them. You might be able to move many hundreds of thousands of those, Matt.
I think one could, but the thing is, anybody can go and make one of these online. It's so simple with the lots of services that are out there. So hopefully we'll see more of them pop up here and there.
Yeah, I'd like that. I'd buy one for sure.
Well, if I see you in the next, actually, maybe I'll send one to you. I know where you'll be soon. So I'll send one to you.
Well, actually, I think in about a week, I'm going to be in Denver on my way to the East Coast. So yeah, I'll do that.
All right. I'll do it
Well, I
then.
guess
Okay.
we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a nice, quiet protest. You don't have to get anyone's face. You can just make people think.
Yeah. And maybe we said a few things that'll cause Antifa or BLM to want to cart us away or punish us somehow. I think anytime you have a conversation where you don't say something that's offensive to the powers of darkness, it's probably a trivial or banal conversation.
That's true. And we haven't been getting much hate mail, as we talked about, so we need to do better.
Yeah, we need to reach out into the highways and byways and deal more with the intellectually lame, halt, and blind.
Yes. All right. Well, this will be it for today. We'll try to do more of that tomorrow. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you.